I have the pleasure introducing our next speaker. Tonight we are joined by Pat Goodman. You can call him Goody. Goody, I know from my time back in Baltimore. He was one of the pastors of the church that I attended called Grace Fellowship Church. I think at the time he was the teaching pastor. And I got to know him a little better through a Bible study that I was able to be part of in the year of 2008, 2009, called Iron Men. And what it was a group of 12 guys that met together every week at O Dark 30. And we were just learned more about each other, more about God. And it was just Goody opening up, what God's taught him, and just bestowing wisdom on young men who were becoming fathers, who were becoming husbands. And it was just an awesome time. And so Goody is, snowed in, maybe. I don't know how much snow you got, but he's been on.
Now we got a little bit, but we're good.
You're good now. He's been on Young Life staff in some capacity, as he says, for 43 years. And so right there, I think you could just hear that he is someone who is faithful. I have a privilege of being on a Bible study on Thursday mornings with him now virtually. And every week someone shares a story of how Goody showed up for them. And so it's just awesome to be able to have him with us tonight. I'm really excited for what he's going to be sharing with us and how God's going to use it. So I'm going to go ahead and just be quiet and give you the metaphorical mic.
Well, thank you, Scott. You guys, it is so great to be with you. When Scott asked me to come, I thought, gosh, this would be great. I want you to know that one of my dearest friends in the whole world is a UNC grad, played on the soccer team back in the day, and interestingly, blew both his knees out. So Maddie Gracie kind of has a feel for you. Thank you again for your generous kindness and sharing your life and your story. I have a feeling that story is going to be shared more than once. And I just want you to know that what we're going to talk about tonight, I'm really looking forward to. This has become a theme for me in my life for a reason. And that was because everybody has a story, right? Everybody on this screen, we all have a story. And yours is still being written to no fault of my own. Mine's a little further down the road than yours. I had nothing to do with that. But it is my life. We had time, which we don't. But some of this maybe will come out tonight, maybe next week again. But nobody lives life without some scars, and you get beat up a little bit and you get a little pain along the way. You get a lot of beauty and goodness, but nobody gets out of this thing without some realities. And I came from a broken family, never lived with my dad again past the age of 7. There's some alcohol in our family. And I learned to cope with life a certain way. Fortunately, I came to faith when some guys reached out to me in my high school and asked me to go to a crazy thing called a Young Life Club, which I had no idea what that was. I won't get into all of that, but I felt like I came alive to a reality that I was hardwired for. I just never knew it. And when I heard it, I went, oh my gosh, how come no one has ever not told me this before now? And it began to put me on a journey that I began to discover was really a road to a lot of healing. And part of healing is taking off the layers, is understanding ourselves and who we are and what makes us do the things that we do. I've been married, golly days, it'll be 43 years in April. And we've been fortunate enough to, we have 3 grown children and 8 grandkids. So I'm sorry you get the old guy tonight, but this is about as good as you can do. So this is what we get. But it is an honor and honestly humbling to share a little bit of some things with you that I hope will be helpful in life giving to you a little bit. But I want to read you just a couple of things here. I just want you to hear these. Parler CEO says he's been fired by the board. Outrage follows Biden's vast majority comments after FBI agent slayings. FBI releases photos of slain agents as a suspected gunman is named. What an expert says about Governor Newsom's chances of getting booted as the governor of California. Rand Paul presses Biden's nominee on transgender student athletes. Just read a couple more for you guys and you just get a feel for this kind of thing that's going on a little bit. Governor Cuomo's health commissioners branded a liar over New York's COVID nursing home controversy. National poll reveals President Biden's approval ratings now below 50%. I'll just read you maybe one more. Pennsylvania GOP blasts Governor Wolf's proposed tax hike, demands better coronavirus response. If I want to ask you, does that sound like the way life's supposed to be? You think we need more of that, right? I mean, it's craziness, isn't it? The fact of the matter is, it actually is the way life is. And what I want to talk to us about tonight is the reality of why is life the way it is? And how can we begin to be people who understand life a little bit differently? So here's a question I want to ask you as we go through tonight. If we have time, I want to just share for about 20 minutes or so. And if you get a thought or a question you'd like a little more on, just jot it down and we'll try to entertain some of these. And then we're going to come back next week and talk a little bit more. But I wonder how many of you have ever been thought about this or have ever considered what it is that you are actually hardwired for as a human being. I mean, you exist. I know that you exist. That's not what I'm asking. I'm asking, what are you actually hardwired for? There's a wonderful context word in the ancient text that the Hebrews, it's a beautiful little word, it's a little 6-letter word called wisdom. It's a profound word that if you read in the Proverbs, it's mentioned again and again and again and again, but particularly in Proverbs chapter 8, it speaks as a woman in the first person. And it says things like this, that I stand at the edge of the city and I cry out at the highest point along the way where the paths meet. This one wisdom takes her stand besides the gate leading into the city, which is really a place where people gather. And wisdom's there, and it's literally yelling out, it's proclaiming something to people. It then goes on a little bit later and it says that I was there before anything was created in the world, before the stars were hung in the sky or the mountains or the oceans, before anything was created, I was there. And then it ends in chapter 8 with these profound words, wisdom speaking, saying, whoever finds me finds life and receives favor from the Lord. But whoever does not find me harms himself. But whoever hates me loves death. Whoever finds me finds life and receives favor from God. But whoever does not find me harms himself. But whoever hates me loves death. Now the question must be, what is wisdom? Now people often say, well, wisdom is when you're really smart. I want you to know this. I've met a lot of smart people that are not wise. If you were to make a recipe of wisdom, it would be taking a little knowledge with some prudence and experience, and you shake it all up, because here's what wisdom means. It means to conform to reality. Let me say it to you one more time. It means to conform to the way things have actually been created to function. You and I are free to do whatever we want. We just can't change reality. So a wise person would not jump off a building. Why? Because you see, there's this thing called gravity, and gravity really doesn't care what you believe, and it's going to play whether you believe in it or not. Another way to say this, the ancient Hebrews would say this, a person who is wise, get this, is skilled at living. I love that. They're skilled at living. Now, there's wisdom when it comes to living. There's wisdom when it comes to agriculture. There's wisdom when it comes to business. There's wisdom when it comes to our sexual lives. There's wisdom in every dimension, meaning this. There is a way life ought to be. And the way that it is isn't the way it ought to be. You hear people say this all the time, and I don't know where everybody is on their faith journey here on the screen, but here's what I know. Even people that they would say to you, they aren't real interested in God every day are making absolute decisions because they see things that they feel aren't right or aren't the way it ought to be. And they'll say it. They go like, man, that stinks. That sucks. That's wrong. Somebody should have done that. And indirectly, they're saying that the way it is isn't how it ought to be. There's an innate sense that there's a way that things ought to be. We get it. And yet the problem is we also don't know how to change it so that it can be different than it is if it isn't how it ought to be. So what I want to share with you a little bit tonight is a bit of learning to conform to reality, that if you can understand this, you will be more skilled at living. Your life will be more rich. Your relationships will have more opportunity to flourish. Because if I were to ask you all the things that I just read, I literally got that idea running today. I said, you know, I'm just going to read some of the headlines from the news. Because every one of those things, at some level, speaks to what I want to talk about tonight and our missing of wisdom. Dallas Willard, who's a great philosopher and theologian, said this. He said, every one of us, every human being is becoming a certain kind of person. It's not if, it's just what kind of person are you becoming? So like Jordan's on here and Allison and Taylor, you know, and Peter and Douglas, like every one of us is becoming a certain kind of person. It's not optional. It's just what kind of person are you becoming? And do you think you've been made to be? So I'm gonna use a crazy illustration. You guys can see this little pipe. You guys can see this pipe. So I want you to just imagine this is your life for a second. Now I know what a pipe that, you know, the purpose of a pipe is that what goes in comes out. You know, I get that, but I want you to imagine, because I just get this image in your mind that this is your life. And if I were to ask you, hey, Peter, what do you think people would say is coming out of your pipe of your life, so to speak? Hey, Joe. Hey, Maddie Grace. What would people, if you could get close to some friends, if they would say, hey, what's coming out of this, my life? Would they say joy, beauty, anger, callousness, kindness, generosity, bitterness? I don't know. But here's what we want to talk about, that what goes in isn't something that just comes out. It actually goes someplace when it goes in. And what you do with what goes into your life will determine what comes out. And I want to tell you, I have a privilege of working with men now. I know men who are 50 who are still 15. They're 50-year-old, they have a 50-year-old body, and they deal with issues like a 15-year-old. If you were to look at how that man or some people and their spouse has an argument, and you could record it, and I'd play it for them, I'd say this, okay, tell me, is this a middle school argument, a high school, or college? Because this is not two civil grown adults having this argument right now. Because here's the deal. Something went in and it went someplace and didn't get dealt with the right way. And what came out wasn't so good. Because our behavior doesn't come from a vacuum. It actually originates someplace. And most people simply live their lives. If I could give you all one word of encouragement now that I'm down the road, like here's what I know, using a golf term, I'm playing the back nine if I was playing golf right now in my life. I don't know whether I'm teeing off on number 10 or I'm in a sand trap on 17. I really don't know, but I know this. If I get 20 more years, I'm going to have a really long, good life. That's a staggering thought for me. But here's what happens. Most people simply live their life. They don't really consider their life they're living, and you have a chance to. You're becoming a certain kind of person. What kind of person are you becoming? And here's the reality. Here's the wisdom. Behavior doesn't come from a vacuum. It actually originates in a place that the scriptures call the heart. This word heart is used over 880 times in the text of scripture. Let me ask you, if repetition's important, do you think 880 times is a message? It's a lot, isn't it? Now the question becomes, what does it mean? Proverbs 4:23 says this, watch over your heart. Another translation would say guard your heart. Like when you all think of guarding something, you don't guard something that's incidental or you don't care much about. You don't watch over something that you don't care if you lose, but it says watch over, guard your heart with all diligence. Like Maddie Grace using you as an illustration, when you were working out back then, you worked out with diligence, didn't you? It wasn't haphazard. It wasn't when you felt like it. It wasn't, you did it on days you didn't feel like it. Like when you're in, and a lot of you are athletes on here, I know this, watch over your heart with all diligence. Get this, for from it, everything originates. That would be an accurate translation. Or watch over it with all diligence, for it is the wellspring or the point of origin of all that you do. this word heart is a beautiful word. It really means the internal core. It's a place of convergence. I'll draw you a picture of this in a minute. We'll see if we can make this work, but it's a place of convergence. Dallas Willard even said at one point, it's like the CEO of your life. I want you just to imagine where your thoughts and your will and your emotions and your desires, they all converge and you live out of this very deep place. This is why the scriptures are saying it's a place of origin. Everything comes from here, whether you know it or not. And so it's interesting, isn't it, that the number one killer every year of human beings, you know what kind of disease it is? You guys know, because you guys go to UNC. Of course you know. It's heart disease. There's this thing called the silent killer. It's called hypertension, which is high blood pressure. Here's what high blood pressure is like. You walk around, everybody looks at you and goes, oh man, they look really good. They look really in shape. And then you blow up, literally, and you fall over and you have a stroke or you die. Because something was going on inside that what was going on outside never revealed. Like you look great on the outside, but on the inside, not so good. This is why, in this intriguing parallel, that our lives are not these compartmentalizations, that what's going on inside of us has a massive implication of eventually what goes on outside of us. Let me draw it for you this way if I can. And I'll see if you guys can maybe see this. Do you guys see my board here? Can you guys see my board? Scott, is that good? Just say yeah, yeah, yeah.
You're good.
Yeah, okay. I'm going to do my best. So this illustration came to me a long time ago, and Scott's probably seen this way more than he wants to, but this is my best version of a iceberg. Now, why don't some of you guys come off Zoom just for a minute, or you're mute, and just tell me, like, how much of an iceberg do you see, do you think? Anybody? Anybody want to take a gander? How much?
10%.
What's that?
10%.
Way to go, Joe. Joe, whatever your grades are, we're going to take you up another grade. That's exactly right, 10 to 15%. And this is what's visible. This is what's visible. This is, our behavior. I'll just put a B up there for behavior, the visible behavior. Our actions. Now, again, which means what? If you're only seeing 10 to 15%, there's a chance that we're missing a little bit, right? And that's the 85% that nobody spends any time paying attention to. Now, here's the crazy thing in life. Most of the time, we spend all our time up on what's visible and behavior. In fact, for many people, knowing God is nothing more than not messing up above the waterline. It's all about behavior. You think the only thing God really cares about with people is they don't sleep around, they don't get drunk, and they don't cuss a lot and don't cheat, and they're somewhat moral. That's all that it means to really know God, and that's all God cares about. You think that's all God really cares about? Let me give you a really crazy thought. Well, I'll get back to that in just a minute. So there's 85% below the waterline, right? Like, this is the part that sunk the Titanic. It wasn't the part they saw. It's the part they didn't spend any time thinking about. The problem is the 10 to 15% that people see gets about 85% of our attention. If you ask most people, do you think God looks at you with a frown or a smile? I wonder what people would say. I think a lot of people, he'd be disappointed in me because I had some really crummy thoughts today, and man, I'm doing some stuff nobody really knows about, and I'm not reading like I think I should or praying like I supposed to, and I'm not always as nice as I'd like to be or kind, and I'm thinking, okay, those things are issues, but do you know why? See, again, behavior comes from someplace, and we get all jacked up about what we do up here, but we never ask the question, why? Where does that come from? This is what the scriptures tell us. It comes from down here, from this place called our heart. See, again, this is where the will and our thoughts and our emotions and our desires all converge. And this thing, at some point, is going to go public. Does this make sense to you guys so far? This thing, you could say this. So Jesus, whatever you think of him, said this. He says, a good tree doesn't produce bad fruit, nor does a bad tree produce good fruit. Each tree produces after its own kind, Luke 6, verse 43. He says, you know, the good man out of the good stored up in his heart brings forth what's good. And the evil man brings forth what is evil. Because the mouth speaks from that which fills the heart. This thing's going to go public at some point. So here's my thing. I asked you about what's coming out of your pipe. You know, if you would listen to people, or you see people's lives, we treat behavior like it's in a vacuum. No. There's a reason why we can't get along with people that don't have the same skin color as us. There's a reason we don't know how to have civil dialogue and conversation with people we disagree with. There's a reason we hurt each other sometimes with our words. There are reasons that couples who've been married for a long time end up getting busted up and marriages get divorced. This is real stuff. Next week, I want to talk a little more about this because here's the deal. Nobody's heart looks this pretty. We've all got some cracks and some holes and some gaff marks. And how well we understand it and what we do with it is going to really matter, because here's what we know about the heart. This heart is hardwired by wisdom to want some things. It desires some things. And it cannot live well without them. It's not a matter if it's going to, it's just a matter of how it's going to get them. And I want to give you 3 things that every human being has been hardwired to not only need, but want, I think, in the right way. You can ask any psychologist this, that every human being is hardwired to need to live well, a sense of significance, a sense of security, and a sense of belonging. It isn't if these needs are going to be met, it's just how. Where are you going to find your sense of significance and value of worth? What's going to give you a sense of security and that somebody's got your back and it's going to be okay? What's going to give you a sense that you actually belong and are wanted? These needs are going to be met one way or the other. It's just how are they going to be met? And so let me just put this down right now. And because these are things that you and I cannot get away from. And if we don't understand how this is, we're going to really end up getting ourselves in a ton of trouble. Because here's what I know. Our heart is like just this bundle of beauty that was meant to love something the most. And in loving the right thing the most and being loved by that thing the most, our sense of security and significance and belonging will be met. So think about this. How powerful do you all think desire is? Let me do it another way. How many of us on this screen, and I'll vote first, have done something that you knew was wrong before you did it, but you did it anyway? Okay, I'll raise my hand. So, okay, look, this is not a safe screen to be on. We're all confessing our good. We're all saying, look, here we are. We're at a meeting about God, so to speak. And we're all saying, oh yeah, I did some stuff wrong that I knew was wrong. And I knew it was wrong before I did it. And I did it anyway. Why would anybody do that? I can tell you why I did it. And it's not complicated. It's because I wanted to. I desired it. I desired to do what was wrong more than I desired to avoid the price of doing something wrong. I wanted what I wanted. Only to say this, desire is powerful, isn't it? Isn't it? It is. So here's the question. Why do we even desire stuff? You ever thought about that? Like, why do we have these desires? Desire is an incredible gift, but it can get you in some trouble. But here's why you and I desire. Think about this. Because we're actually desired. Come on. You know, the scriptures tell us this. God did not have to create anything to validate himself. He wasn't obligated. He actually created something because he wanted to. And he created us in a way that we could actually have a relationship with the one who wants us the most. And he hardwired us so we'd want the most, the one who wants us the most. This is why Proverbs says about wisdom, that to honor, to look to evaluate oneself is the fear of God is another way of using that, to reverence, to see, to lean into, to look to treat the one who is the highest as the highest. That is the beginning of wisdom. Our heart is going to pursue security, significance, and belonging more than anything in the world, one way or another, come hell or high water, and it's meant to be found in him. And we can go to crazy places, look at it, define it. So I'll prove it to you, and then I want to share one more scripture, and then we'll be done. Because next week, what I'd love to do is talk about how that heart's shaped. How does it get the way it is? And what are you going to do with the things that actually shape it? Because here's what's happened to all of us. I'll give you a little preview. Every one of us have had real experiences in our life that have been beautiful and hard. They're true experiences, but every experience has a little UPS truck that follows it, and it drops off some messages. And not every message that comes from a real experience is a truthful message. And when you begin to believe lies as the truth, it does crazy things to your heart. You can grow up as a 40 and to become a 45-year-old man or woman, and you're threatened by stuff because you're still living like you were 13 or 14 years old. We'll talk about that next week too. I'm telling you, a lot of times people's anatomical age does not equal their emotional age. And one of the greatest decisions you're going to have to make is, are you willing to grow up? And to grow up means we got to take an honest look at the deepest parts of us, which is our heart. So I have the privilege of, I have over the number of years of being involved in this thing downtown Baltimore called the Helping Up Mission. They're just getting ready to open up a facility for 250 women with their kids. It's a little over 100 years old, but it's a facility for men who've blown their lives up with drugs and alcohol. Anywhere from 20 to 65 years old are in there, 350 of them. So I've had a chance to a friend of mine. I've been going down there for 4 or 5 years and helping out with a couple classes, and I'll never forget this. So one day we're talking about this vision of wisdom and the heart. And I said, hey, this might sound stupid, but on the whiteboard like this one, big one, I said, hey, what got you guys in here, man? And they go like, what? I go like, what got you in here? Now, listen, this is a drug and alcohol year-long rehabilitation program, okay? It's faith-based for a year long. They go, drugs, alcohol, stupid-ass decisions. I mean, these are literally their words, like hanging out with people shouldn't have been around. Like, what do you mean? I go like, I said, okay, let me ask it again. What got you in here? They go, dude, like, what are you talking about? Like those things. I go, what would you think if I told you, I don't think that's what got you in here? Well, the room got dead quiet. I mean, dead quiet. And I said, let me change the question. What did you want or desire when you did those things that you just had me list on the board there? Drugs, alcohol, crazy decisions, crazy living, whatever. And it was interesting. I haven't had one negative answer yet. And I've asked a ton of men this question. Here's their answers. Things like this. I wanted love. I wanted a place to belong. I wanted some peace of mind. I wanted just a little bit of calm in my life. And I said, look at these two lists. I asked you what got you in here. You told me drugs, alcohol, crazy decisions, hanging out with the wrong people. And I said, well, what did you want when you did those things? And you said, love, peace of mind. I wanted to belong. I wanted to feel like I had a place. I said, look at these two lists. I said, could it be that what got you in here wasn't a bad thing, but it was a good thing, that you actually went to a bad place to have the need met? I said, could it be that what got you in, it was really good things that you desired in the deepest parts of your soul that eventually you never understood, because underneath every one of those things, you could attach security, significance, belonging. I said, what got you in here was what you were hardwired for as a human being. You just went to the wrong address to fulfill it. And I know this is being recorded, but they can handle this. But in the back of the room one week, this guy goes, that's crazy. Never even thought of that. Another guy said, hey, look, you mean like when your dad, when you're 9, tells you you're a piece of crap and you'll never be like your brother? I said, how old are you, man? He goes, I'm 45. I said, when were you told that? He goes, when I was 9. I go, so for 36 years, you've been living with that in your head? He goes, oh, and a lot more than that. So he began to run when he didn't know how to get the needs met the right way. He didn't want to feel pain. I don't want to feel pain. You guys get up every day and go, boy, I think I'll have a little more pain today. We don't know what to do with our pain. We do crazy things too, right? But here's what I want you to hear. Here's wisdom. You better watch over your heart with all diligence, for from it flow the springs of life. Something is coming out of your life. You are actually becoming a certain kind of person. And it doesn't need to be up for grabs, but it will have 100% dependence upon the health of your internal core, your heart. This is why in Mark chapter 7, the religious leaders were all upset with Jesus because his disciples had eaten with unclean hands. They'd kind of gone to the Chick-fil-A of the day, and the guys had played around in the playground and started eating their chicken McNuggets without washing their hands. And the religious leaders got all jacked up about it. And Jesus said, well, you know, you guys honor me with your lips, but your hearts are really far from me. You see, don't you know that whatever goes into a man doesn't make him unclean, but what comes out, because whatever goes into a man is basically just eliminated. But he says, if you really care, listen to this. See, all these things, he said, come from within a man and make him unclean. Sexual immorality, impurity, lust, evil desires, greed, malice, slander, hatred. All these things come from within, from a man's heart. 880 times in the scriptures, at least, it has all these different adjectives. It can be clean. It can be pure. It can be divided. It can be lustful. It can be arrogant. We treasure things there. It can be new. It can be evil. It can be a lot of things. It can be a number of things all in one day. Can it? Have you ever shocked yourself in the course of the day how kind you can be and how evil some of your thoughts can be? Maybe I'm the only one. I don't know. But here's what I know. Growing up means let's take an honest look at this thing called our heart, because when stuff goes in, it doesn't just come out. It gets deposited in something right in here. We'll talk about that called our heart next week. I want to talk more about how we're shaped. Scott, I think we'll end there tonight, if that's all right. And I want to leave a little time if anybody would like to ask a few questions or maybe have any more clarity. And then next week, we'll pick back up on this and talk a little bit more about how our heart is shaped and some of the voices that speak to us. So if anybody would like to, you can come off mute if you want to put a question in the chat room or a thought or just a response or any more elaboration or anything. Happy to continue to keep going and share a little bit more if that would be helpful for anybody.
Can you show the board again?
Yeah, I sure can. Yep.
What did you write the V, B, and H for?
V, B, and H, where am I?
Up top.
Oh, that was for what's visible, behavior, and actions. That was an A.
Okay.
Yeah, this is what's visible. And that often gets, a lot of times what we spend all of our energies, I think, focusing on is things that people can see, which is not incidental. It doesn't mean nothing, but I'm saying it's intriguing to me that we often ignore the real essence of something and give a lot of attention. Like, if we want to begin to live different lives, you can just kind of give all your energy and willpower and white knuckle it up here. Or you can say, hey man, let me really get healthy down here. Because here's what I know. We change to the degree that you know you're loved. You really change when you know you're loved. And I just know this. I've been around long enough to know this. There's a lot of people that I think say that God loves them, but how they're living up here doesn't connect with it really being down here. I'm not sure they really got it, because when this thing gets set free, this thing lives differently up here. This is why a good tree produces good fruit. it's not doing anything other than what it is. It actually does good because it is good. It's not like it's got to try a lot of effort. It does what it is. So I hope that again, illustration, you can even think of a volcano in many ways that, eventually a volcano erupts, but it erupts because something has churned enough, whether it's what's coming out is good or bad. It's interesting that Jesus says the mouth speaks from that which fills the heart. I don't know if you've ever had somebody watch them have a verbal explosion, or watch sometimes even your own self at times. And if you could stop and go like, whoa, 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 whoa. We get all jacked up about words. Jesus said, what you ought to really be asking is what's going on? Because that's coming from someplace. What is that about? What's going on? Why do I feel so threatened in these situations? Why do these kind of people, why do I tend to react this way in these situations? Why do I avoid this or run to this or ignore this? Or your life speaking. And part of it's the challenge to try to understand it. Thank you for the question. Anybody else? This is great. Love to have a couple more if there are.
I think in the beginning you said conform to reality.
Yeah.
How it was created to function. Can you elaborate more on that?
Yeah. So thank you, Douglas. What I'm saying is life isn't haphazard. God created us to flourish, and there's a way that things actually do flourish. The planets aren't just banging into each other for a reason. I mean, there's a rhyme and reason to that. You look at the human body. I mean, I could have given you some hard facts. I didn't want to take the time tonight. It's an amazing muscle in our body, just a phenomenal organ. Our body, just the fact that we can do and look and see, and, just doing this is so complicated. I mean, it is amazing how people will look at something like an iPhone with all of its complexity and its design and intricacy and go like, oh no, somebody had to create that. If you found that, on the shore of the ocean, you wouldn't go look what the ocean made.
Right.
Nobody would in their right mind. And yet people somehow, we can look at us and go like, oh man, that's a mistake. I don't get it. I don't know how, like doing this is way more complicated than creating this.
Wow.
And what I'm saying, we only can create this because there's a oughtness to how things have to function to do this. You just can't throw stuff together and get the kind of outcomes we want. There is a way in which things can flourish. And here's my point. You and I were created, it says from the very beginning, to live our lives in response to God who created us, who wanted us.
Hallelujah.
He didn't create us just to obey him. I think we would obey him, but he created us to love him and trust him.
Oh.
The greatest thing humanity did wrong wasn't, we committed, basically we got in bed with the wrong lover. Think about it. Like we committed spiritual adultery. We gave the affection that was due to God away, and we trusted ourselves more. That's not the way we're created. We don't get a vote on how humanity flourishes best, but we tend to think that we do, so we do what we want. Like, yes, why do we struggle with relationships so much? Do we have to? But we do. Like, do we really need nuclear bombs? There's only so much space on planet Earth. Like, is the goal that we really need to threaten each other with up? Like, where are we going to go? Do we have to do this? I mean, but we do. I mean, can we really not figure out healthcare for every human being in the United States, or good education? I mean, I know boys in Baltimore City that got a sucky education. What's with that? I mean, I come up with reasons. I'm just saying we're going against, Douglas, the oughtness of how things are best created to function. We can do whatever we want. We can't change reality, though. And I think where you experience brokenness and chaos and division and heartache, something ought to tell us this ain't the way it ought to be, because when God created it, that wasn't the way it was. Does that make sense?
Yeah, 100%.
Right. And so when we look and have eyes to try to discern and gain understanding, this is why the Proverbs says, look, get wisdom, wisdom supreme. It's more valuable than gold and silver. Nothing you have is more valuable than this. Like learn. Because when you do, you will be skilled at living. I promise you, there are people who are very successful and very lonely. Then there are people who are, quote, very successful, but their life isn't wrapped around it. And they've really thought about what matters most and leveraged their success for other things.
Mm.
So that's a little bit of what I'm trying to say.
Thank you.
Yeah. But what owns our heart, which we'll talk about a little bit more next week, what's the greatest voice, has everything to do with our healing, with our deeper sense of security and significance and belonging and purpose and courage and being able to grow up and move. It's really beautiful. But I think a lot of people, they say, well, I believe in God, but they never go deep enough because they just keep coming up against the wall. And then they start thinking, man, there must be something wrong with God, or I must not be very good at this God thing. So I'm out. Like, I'm going to tell you guys this, and I don't want to sound like a dad here. I'm just saying, I'm sure that all of you we could go around. There's been pain in people's lives. And I wish I could tell you it's ended for you. There'll be no more pain. None. That would be so lying. Like, I know this. Your life is probably going to give you another opportunity to get off the faith train. You're going to have more opportunities to blame God for something, if that's what you want to do. But you've got to have frameworks of how you're going to understand reality. I mean, we lost our first son. I almost lost our second daughter at 18 years old. Like, I've had a little bit of crap. And how well you deal with stuff along the way matters, because it doesn't just go away. How about maybe one more question? We got time for one more. Or maybe not.
I could lead you into something that you could close with if you'd like, Goody.
Great. Thanks, Scott.
Recently you've been talking about the oughtness, and at the beginning you were talking about how things, what the world is. And you talked about, how it can be. I was wondering if you could just kind of lay that out more. Ought is, can, and will. Did I do it right?
Yeah. Good friend of mine, Mike Metzger, and I don't know if Mike came up with this. I think he's certainly had a lot to do with it, or others. If you were to take a look at the great themes, the great four big buckets of the scriptures, there'd be some subtitles or subparts, but I think you could usually come up with, people wouldn't battle this, would be creation, the fall, redemption, and restoration. Those are big words though, right? Like, you can imagine saying to one of your classmates, hey, you want to have a little conversation today about creation, fall, redemption, restoration? That would be great. They go like, what the heck are you talking about? But they use this language all the time if you just change the words. So think about creation is how life ought to be or should be. You hear people talking about this all the time. You just listen to Mark going around. People will say, like, hey, man, and indirectly, they'll talk about what should be by telling you what shouldn't be. If somebody says, man, that's not right, indirectly, they're telling you what is right, right? They're basically saying the opposite of that's probably the right thing in their mind. But at least they're following like the code. So the fall is, the creation is how it ought to be. The fall is how it is. So ought is. Redemption is how it can be different than it is, if it isn't how it ought to be. Ought is can. Restoration is how it will be one day, because one day it will be how it ought to be. It's kind of a full circle. And so if you think about creation, fall, redemption, restoration as ought, is, can, will, you can have great conversations with people about anything. If people are saying like, hey man, I think we ought to be able to do whatever we want. Well, why do you think that? Tell me about it. Where did you get your sense of oughtness from? Who decides that? Is that the way it actually is in the world? Well, how can it be different than it is? People know that there's problems in the world. When you begin to ask them, well, do you think that's the way it ought to be? No, it isn't. Well, why do you think it is the way it is? And how can it be different than it is? Most people lose it between is and can. They see how it is. They sense it's not how it ought to be, but they have no clue how it can be different than it is. Because you know why? They don't know how to deal with the heart. What they want to do is how to be nice to each other seminars. If we could learn to see every human being, get this, what if there was only one race? It's called the human race, with numerous ethnicities or ethnos or nation groups. But what if we said, no, there's one human race with a variety of ethnicities, but every one of those ethnicities makes up the human race, and every human being actually has as much value as another from creation. That's how it ought to be. It isn't how it is, but it's how it ought to be. And how it can be different than it is when people begin to grasp again how Almighty God thinks of us, that creation is his idea, and what he did to come after it again when it said no to him. You and I can begin to see people differently. We probably wouldn't have to do some of the seminars we're doing, because people at a deep level would want to value another human being. That I would want other people who don't look like me's children to get an education like my own. That it would matter to me that there are gaps. That truth would matter. And so we have a vision of what will be one day based on what ought to be in creation. The word shalom is a great word for creation. You know, people think it means peace. The Hebrew University in Tel Aviv described shalom as this way. It's beautiful. It's nothing missing and nothing broken. It's harmonious. Just imagine where there's nothing missing and nothing broken. So God creates life the way it ought to be. We said no to his yes, and we ended up with the way it is. But God said, you know what, I love you too much, and I'm going to come so it can be how it ought to be again through the work that I'm going to do in you. Because one day I'm going to actually remake it the way it ought to be. And so there's a full circle reality to that. That make sense, Scott?
That's where I wanted you to go.
Yeah. We can talk more next week.
I just thought it was a good thing to kind of end on, since you had kind of been referencing it, and just something you do naturally in conversation. Goody, thanks for tonight. If you all didn't figure it out, he's going to be back with us next week. So if you like tonight, you could invite your teammates, your friends, anyone you want, even if they don't go here. We have a student from Penn State on tonight, which is awesome. We love it. So he's experiencing the snow that you are, Goody.
Well,
I'm
a Maryland grad, ACC till we moved to the Big Ten, though we always lost you guys pretty much in every sport, but that's all right. Go ahead.
Awesome. Well, I'm going to close in prayer, and then we'll let you all jump off and go do what you need to do. And hopefully you'll all be able to join us next week as we pick up where we left off tonight.
You've been gracious and kind, and hopefully next week we can even make a review and go another level on this. Okay.